More than 24 reported tornadoes ripped through the Midwest. The strong winds tore roofs off homes and scattered debris. At least 2 people were hurt. More severe weather is headed for the region today. Powerful thunderstorms are expected to bring large hail and possibly more tornadoes.
Dangerous wildfires are spreading across the western part of the country. Hot temperatures and dry brush are fueling the flames. At least 4 new fires were reported in Southern California yesterday. Another wildfire grew to more than 1,600 acres in northern Montana. Jamie Yukas shows us how conditions are expected to get even worse as the week goes on.
2.5 acres so far.
No rest late into the night Tuesday for Southern California firefighters.
This fire is burning uphill, and it is burning in some pretty thick brush.
A water-dropping helicopter worked into the early morning hours to try to contain the fire, which continued to burn about 20 miles east of Los Angeles. It came after a day of fighting fast-moving wildfires across the Southland. A wildfire in a farming community about 40 miles east of LA quickly grew to 40 acres Tuesday, burning at least 1 structure. People in the area had little warning.
It went up fast.
Those living here worked quickly to move their animals and livestock out of harm's way.
Jiang Pei-yun shows us what's left of her family home. But she's soon overcome with emotion. Her 67-year-old mother-in-law was killed.
Mud and water rushed into our house and my mother-in-law drowned. The water was at least waist deep.
Heavy rain had brought down the hill next to the house. Other family members escaped, but they're now homeless, living temporarily with relatives.
3 people lost their lives in Maulu village, killed in landslides caused by heavy rain. People here tell us it had been raining for several days before the slopes gave way.
Chicago saw a spike in shootings this 4th of July weekend, despite a decline in gun violence in recent months. According to the Chicago Tribune, at least 101 people were shot between Friday afternoon and Wednesday morning. 15 of those people died. That's more than twice the number of people reportedly shot over the holiday weekend last year, though it's important to note that this 4th of July weekend was a full day longer. But police say there's been a 14% drop in shootings in the first 6 months of 2017 compared to the first half of 2016. More than 1,800 people have been shot in Chicago so far this year. The spike in shootings comes days after U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced an increase in the number of Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms agents stationed in Chicago. 20 ATF agents will help state and local officials run a gun violence task force focused on reducing the number of gun crimes in the city.
Authorities in Hamburg are bracing themselves for violent protests on the eve of a 2-day G20 summit. Thousands of anti-globalization demonstrators have descended on the northern German city ahead of the meeting. The city's police chief has expressed fears anarchists will attempt to carry out massive assaults during the event. G20 Welcome to Hell is the slogan activists have adopted for their protest.
There have been violent scenes on the streets of Buenos Aires as protesters clashed with riot police. Several people were arrested, although there's been no official confirmation of the numbers detained. Local media say the protesters are from a number of radical leftist groups in Argentina. They accuse President Mauricio Macri of stoking poverty and inequality through his free market policies. Macri has sought to push through austerity measures to get the debt-ravaged country's economy back on track. However, midterm elections in October could undo his plans.
politicians under attack for opposing Venezuela's president. Dozens of his supporters breached the grounds of the National Assembly on Wednesday. Lawmakers and journalists tried to get to safety inside the building, but some of the attackers also got in before the door could be closed. Several people were left bleeding from violent government loyalists.
Yes, the injuries hurt us, but not as much as the pain we feel each time we see our country falling apart when they kill our youth. We will continue forward, don't have the slightest doubt.
There's been growing unrest in Venezuela over the past 3 months. At least 90 people have died in nationwide protests against Maduro's rule. His detractors accuse him of being a dictator who has almost bankrupted the country.
Cholera is a disease that affects the weakest in society. It takes grip on both the young and the elderly. As this outbreak spreads across Yemen, it's becoming clear this war-torn country is unable to cope with another crisis. This hospital in the capital says it's receiving hundreds of new cases every day, leaving wards full of patients and their desperate relatives.
This is my daughter. She contracted the disease 5 days ago. Without the hospital staff, my daughter would have died. We ask the world to provide us with more medicine.
My mother fell ill suddenly. Anyone with symptoms should not hesitate and get medical help before it's too late. The situation in here is getting worse. The hospitals do not have any spare beds.
Through the ash and the wreckage, Malika Khalaf Ali walks through what was once her home. All that's left are bits of metal. Nothing worth salvaging. Khalaf Ali has lived at this camp in Lebanon's eastern Bekaa Valley for more than 4 years. She fled here with her 6 children after armed groups seized the town they lived in Syria's Raqqa province. What few possessions they were able to take with them are now gone.
I've lost everything, every bit of my home. My furniture is gone, it's been turned into ashes. My 4 years of savings have been wiped out. So has the medication I need and the expensive medication my children take. One has asthma and the other suffers from rheumatism.
The world's chemical weapons watchdog says the banned nerve agent sarin was used in an attack in northern Syria in April that killed dozens of people. A report by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons says the gas was used in the town of Khan Sheikhoun in northern Idlib province on April the 4th. At least 87 people died.
A serious political and military provocation, that's the view of Beijing after a US warship sailed close to a disputed island in the South China Sea. The USS Stetham, a guided missile destroyer, passed within 12 nautical miles of Triton Island, part of the Paracel Islands, on Sunday. Along with China, the archipelago is also claimed by Taiwan and Vietnam. The US Navy said the operation was conducted as part of a freedom of navigation exercise. China responded by deploying military vessels and fighter planes. The incident happened only hours before Presidents Trump and Xi Jinping spoke on the phone. It is the second time in just over 2 months that Washington has directly challenged Beijing's claims in the South China Sea.
After the successful launch by North Korea of possibly its most destructive missile yet, more promises to try to curtail an ever-increasing nuclear threat. Agreement by diplomats on the UN Security Council that the latest launch is a troubling provocation that needs to be curtailed, but disagreement on how. Nikki Haley, the U.S. envoy, said the U.S. will look to cease trading with any countries seen doing business with North Korea, but also promised even graver repercussions.
The United States is prepared to use the full range of our capabilities to defend ourselves and our allies. One of our capabilities lies with our considerable military forces. We will use them if we must, but we prefer not to have to go in that direction.
But China, North Korea's strongest ally, said no steps by any side should be taken which would exacerbate tensions.
China has always been firmly opposed to chaos and conflict on the peninsula. Military means must not be an option in this regard.
A warning signal to North Korea from U.S. and South Korean forces. The combined precision-firing military exercises, a direct response to this, what North Korea says is its first successful launch of an ICBM, or intercontinental ballistic missile. Celebrations in the streets of Pyongyang as state television broadcast the news. Kim Jong-un called it a gift to Americans celebrating the 4th of July Independence Day holiday. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson confirmed the missile was an ICBM and said it represents a new escalation of the threat to the United States. The U.S. called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. The latest American and South Korean military drills were in direct response to the launch, but the countries also hold massive joint exercises every year. Meeting in Moscow, the presidents of Russia and China called for both sides of the conflict to take a step back.
The Trump administration wants to sell a military arms package to Taiwan totaling about $1.4 billion. CNN reports the sale would include technical help for early warning radar as well as torpedoes and missiles. Now, this sale is actually worth quite a bit less than some previous arms sales to Taiwan. In late 2015, the Obama administration announced a $1.8 billion sale. And in 2011, the U.S. made a $5.8 billion deal with Taiwan, primarily to help it upgrade its aging F-16 fighter jets. China wasn't happy about those sales, and it isn't pleased with this one. China views Taiwan as part of its territory under the One China policy. The U.S. doesn't necessarily endorse the policy, but to keep the peace, it also doesn't officially recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. However, under the Taiwan Relations Act, the U.S. is legally obligated to provide Taiwan with the military weapons and services it needs to defend itself. Also on Thursday, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin proposed new sanctions against a Chinese bank with ties to North Korea. Those sanctions and the arms sale could make it harder for President Donald Trump to convince Chinese President Xi Jinping to help curb North Korea's missile program. If Congress has any objections to the Taiwan arms sale, it needs to raise them within the next month.
The US has unveiled enhanced security measures for flights to the country designed to prevent expanding an in-cabin ban on laptops. EU and US officials say the measures could be introduced in the next 3 weeks. In March, the US banned laptops on flights to the US originating from 10 airports in 8 countries, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and Turkey.
With this announcement, we send a clear message that inaction is not an option. Those who choose not to cooperate or are slow to adopt these measures could be subject to other restrictions, including a ban on electronic devices on aircraft or even a suspension of their flights into the United States.
Airline trade groups are warning the changes might cause disruption. They could require additional time to screen passengers and personal electronic devices for possible explosives. Since laptops are widely used in flight by business class passengers, the airline industry had feared expanding the ban could cut into its revenue.
Scientists estimate Earth is home to more than 3 trillion trees, but they're slowly disappearing by about 15 billion a year. And humans only plant about 9 billion each year. But some groups are using drones to speed up forestation efforts. Companies like Biocarbon Engineering use drones with onboard sensors that analyze terrain to find the best planting spots. Once they find suitable land, the drones shoot seeds to the ground. Biocarbon Engineering's drones can carry up to 150 seeds at a time, and a pair of operators can seed an estimated 100,000 trees a day. This makes planting by drone cost-efficient. Startup Drone Seed predicted that one of its drones could plant 800 seeds in an hour, which would take a human worker all day.